He was known in Nottingham as an entertainer, a man who turned up at family parties with a smile and a guitar case, ready to bring music and laughter to the room. To his loved ones, he was more than that: a husband, a father, a son. A man who worked hard and lived quietly, devoted to the people who depended on him. But on one February evening, as he packed his guitar case into the back of his estate car and set out for what he thought was a simple booking, he was walking straight into a nightmare. The client, he believed, wanted him to perform at his 60th birthday party. The inquiry had seemed genuine, a polite call, details of the event, and an address in Sneinton. It was the kind of request he'd received dozens of times before. Nothing about it set off alarm bells. He couldn't know that every detail had been fabricated as part of a cold and calculated trap. When he arrived at the house on Manor Street, the setting was quiet, unremarkable. Rows of terraced houses, cars parked tight against the curb. A typical Nottingham neighbourhood. He walked up to the door, guitar case in hand, and knocked. The door opened, and in a heartbeat, everything changed. Inside, several men in balaclavas were waiting. They lunged forward, dragging him in. He had no chance to escape. His arms were pinned, his mouth sealed with duct tape. He was bound and gagged before he could even cry out. In an instant, the family entertainer was transformed into a captive. Nottingham is a city with two faces. On one side, a rich history, a vibrant student population, busy nightlife, and proud traditions. On the other, the same undercurrents of crime that run through any major city. For decades, Nottinghamshire Police have dealt with gangs, drugs, and organised violence. But few crimes cut as deeply into the public sense of safety as this. The abduction of a man on an ordinary booking, carried out in a family neighbourhood. The plan itself was brutally simple: lure him with a false booking, then use him to extort his family. He had been chosen not because of his wealth or status, but because the gang believed his family could somehow produce a fortune. To them, he wasn't a person, he was leverage. The entertainer was shoved into a waiting car and driven away. For the next 32 hours, he was shuffled between multiple properties across Nottingham. The gang moved him from Sneinton to Wallerton, then to Rise Park. Each address became a holding site, each transfer another cruel reminder that his fate was not his own. At every stage, his fear grew. Every door creak, every car stopping outside, any of it could mean death. The men who held him offered no comfort, no reassurances, only threats. Time became his enemy. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into an eternity. His sense of day and night blurred. He had no idea whether it was morning or midnight, no clue whether help was even possible. In those moments of darkness, he clung to fleeting thoughts of his wife, his children, and the familiar comfort of home. Using his phone, the kidnappers made contact with his wife and father. The message was chilling in its simplicity: pay £250,000 or risk losing him forever. For the family, each call was a stab of terror. Imagine hearing your husband's muffled voice, forced into the background of a call, knowing he was bound and helpless. Imagine being told you must somehow raise £250,000, an impossible figure, while every second ticked by with his life on the line. The family were trapped in a nightmare. If they refused, they might lose him. If they tried to comply, how could they possibly gather such money? The demand was designed to be crushing, to instill maximum fear. His wife barely slept. His father, a proud man, found himself reduced to tears, begging strangers on the other end of the line for mercy. Their home, once filled with warmth, became a place of silence and dread. Later, detectives would confirm this was no spontaneous crime. It was a conspiracy carefully planned by 6 men: Khalsa Jogger Singh, Dickpal, Darshan Rathore, Inderpal Singh, Servan Rathore, Jamie Raggett, and Nerva Singh. At least one of them had even worked to embed himself within the family circle in advance, gaining trust to better calculate how much could be demanded. It was betrayal at its most personal. The entertainer endured constant psychological torment. He was gagged and restrained, cut off from any control. Hours dragged into an eternity. He could not know if his family was safe, if they were complying, or if the next moment would bring his death. He tried to cling to small things, the thought of his wife's voice, the hope of seeing his children again, but the fear was overwhelming. Finally, after around 32 hours of captivity, the gang made their final move. They bundled him into a car and drove him to Radford. On Gawthorne Street, they threw him out like discarded rubbish. He was left humiliated, wearing only boxer shorts and socks. His arms were bound, his face covered in duct tape. Stumbling down the street, terrified and injured, he was spotted by passers-by who raised the alarm. Emergency services rushed him to Queen's Medical Centre. physically he would recover. But the scars of that ordeal, the betrayal, the humiliation, the memory of duct tape sealing his mouth would remain far longer. For the family, the nightmare was over. He was alive. But Nottinghamshire Police now faced a new challenge, finding the men responsible and proving their conspiracy in court. The entertainer's rescue marked the end of his captivity, but for Nottinghamshire Police, it was only the beginning. 6 men had orchestrated a sophisticated plot spanning multiple addresses, vehicles, and phone lines. Now the task was to unpick every detail. The gang's crucial mistake was the phone. By forcing the victim to use his mobile, they left behind digital footprints. Every ransom call carried metadata, numbers dialed, times logged, cell towers pinged. Detectives seized the opportunity. Analysts pored over the records, cross-matching data against known associates. Slowly but surely, a pattern emerged. Technology became the case's silent witness. Nottingham's network of ANPR cameras captured number plates on the city's roads day and night. Detectives reviewed the records, tracing vehicles linked to the suspects. The routes matched the victim's testimony almost exactly. Sneinton to Wollerton, Wollerton to Rise Park, and finally Radford. The gang had worn masks and balaclavas, but they could not hide from the cameras. They could not disguise the cold accuracy of data. With evidence mounting, Nottinghamshire Police planned coordinated strikes. Warrants were secured. At dawn, teams of officers executed raids across Nottinghamshire. Doors were smashed in, properties searched top to bottom, evidence bags filled with duct tape, gloves and phones were carried out. Digital devices were seized for forensic analysis. Arrests followed. Some suspects tried to talk their way out, offering excuses or partial admissions. Others denied everything. But the digital evidence was too strong. Calls, text, vehicle movements and witness accounts tied them firmly to the crime. Detectives later recall the tense hours leading up to the raids. Officers knew they were going after men capable of violence. Planning had to be meticulous. Specialist units were briefed. Streets were sealed off in the early dawn light. Neighbours awoken by the sound of battering rams against doors. It was Nottinghamshire Police at their most determined. In 2024, the case reached Nottingham Crown Court. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with tension. Jurors listened as prosecutors laid out the story step by step, the fake booking, the ambush, the 32-hour ordeal, and the ransom calls. They were shown maps with the victim's journey plotted across the city. They heard recordings of the ransom demands, cold and direct, echoing through the silent courtroom. The victim himself was spared the worst of the ordeal in public. The evidence was enough. His appearance in court was brief, but his presence was powerful. Jurors saw the man who had been bound, gagged and dumped like rubbish, alive but scarred by what had been done to him. Family members sat in the public gallery holding their breath as the sentences approached. The relief was visible on their faces when the verdicts were finally delivered. After months of waiting, justice had spoken. The charges are stark: conspiracy to kidnap and conspiracy to blackmail. When the verdicts were read, the sentences reflected the severity of the crime. Halsa Jogga Singh Digpal got 18 years. Darshan Rathore, 16 years. Indipal Singh sentenced to 14 years. Servam Rathore sent down for 13 years. Jamie Raggett got 12 years. And Nirva Singh was sentenced to 6 years. As the judge handed down these terms, he described the crime as a calculated and callous conspiracy, noting how the kidnappers had shown no regard for the victim's humanity. He told the defendants that their actions had left lasting scars not just on one man, but on an entire family who had lived in fear for 32 hours. The judge emphasized that each of them had played a role in a crime that was both chilling in its planning and devastating in its execution. Their sentences, he said, were intended to reflect society's utter rejection of such cruelty. For the family man, justice had been delivered. But justice is not the same as healing. Nights were still restless. Loud noises still triggered memories of balaclavas and tape. His wife and father carried their own scars, haunted by the sound of his muffled voice on the phone, begging for help they couldn't give. For Nottinghamshire Police, the case was hailed as a triumph of modern policing. Senior officers praised the collaboration between detectives, analysts, and community units. They highlighted how data, once invisible to criminals, had become the key weapon in securing convictions. Behind every arrest was a mountain of work, weeks of analysis, and hours of surveillance. The community of Nottingham was left shaken. This wasn't a feud between gangs or a dispute among criminals. This was the abduction of an ordinary man, targeted simply because the conspirators thought they could profit. Local residents spoke of their disbelief that such a crime had unfolded on ordinary streets, a chilling reminder that crime could be hiding just a few doors away. Parents reassured frightened children, and neighbours gathered in disbelief, asking how something so dark could happen on streets so familiar. If you found this story important, please like the video, subscribe for more UK true crime documentaries, and share it with others, because behind every headline is a human being, and some, like this family man, must never be forgotten.